begin to heal quicker. And I don't say heal as in we're never going to feel our loss again. But I can tell you, 11 years after my son has died, my wound is not gaping anymore. I would say it's a scar. I'm not actively bleeding. There's a scar. And every once in a while, on certain days, his birthday, his death day, I will choose to go into that grief. And when I come to these retreats, I'm choosing to go into that grief. But most of the time, I can think of Tage and I can smile. I miss him. I wish I could hold him, but it's not this gaping wound anymore. And that's what I mean by grieve well, that we can get to a place, and wouldn't we all prefer to get there sooner than later, where we aren't bleeding everywhere anymore. But that doesn't take away from the loss or the love of our child. There's still a scar. So, like I said, it's been 11 years now since I last saw his little 8-month-old face. And some days I can step right back in there as if it was yesterday. And then some days it feels like a completely different lifetime ago. But I remember the days when the weight of grief and anxiety, I thought it would never lift. I was convinced that that level of pain would never end, that this is just who I am now. I remember the months following his death, that first year in particular, the struggle of just trying to function. I would equate myself with a window pane that maybe a rock had hit and it had shattered. And you could see all the little cracks. And I felt in those early months of grief that if someone would just touch it, it would all come crumbling. And yet there were parts of me that I wanted someone to touch it, because then the tears came. And then I could talk about Tage. It was this weird tension. Most people were afraid to touch the pain. They were afraid of my tears, unless they'd experienced loss themselves. Jesus was not afraid to be with the grieving, or the doubting, or the struggling, or the failing. In fact, the Bible tells us that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he rescues those whose spirits are crushed. Psalm 34:18. And so when so many people in your life are maybe afraid to be around you, or they don't want to think about the possibility that their child could die, and your story reminds them that there is a possibility that their child could die, and so they don't want to be around you, they can't handle it. But in a world when so many are afraid to be around your tears and your sorrow and your brokenness, Jesus comes closer. My favorite chapter in the Bible about grief is John chapter 11. And so I'm excited to get to dig into this with you today. I love that Jesus in the Gospels is demonstrating that he came so close to the brokenhearted, in fact, that he became like us. Left a throne to come and experience our pain and our loss. I picture Einstein, who would make himself an ant and live in an ant colony and give up all the joys of being human and what we love about being a human compared to being an ant. In the same way, I think I equate Jesus becoming like us and all that he gave up so that we could know him. So let's look at John chapter 11, and I'm going to just read a verse or two at a time and stop and say a couple things. A man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany with his sisters, Mary and Martha. This is the Mary who later poured the expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was sick. So the two sisters sent a message to Jesus telling him, "Lord, your dear friend is very sick." And I want us to see here that Jesus and Mary and Martha and Lazarus are good friends. They eat meals together. They laugh together. Maybe they have some inside jokes. It's one of those situations where it's like your family friend. You know the whole family. Jesus knows Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, all those siblings. We don't hear about their parents, so I wonder if something has happened to their parents. But he knows this family. It's this good family friends. And we see that Jesus is not near. And so they're like, "Oh, call Jesus. He'll know what to do." Just like maybe we would be like, "Oh, our friend the doctor, like let's call." You have these personal connections with people. So you're like, "Call him. He'll know what to do." Verse 4, but when Jesus heard about it, he said, "Lazarus' sickness will not end in death." He already knew the outcome. He continues, "No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this." Past tense, it happened. So not the death, because he's not dead yet. He's just sick. But he's saying that this sickness was already known by God. And Jesus knew already that Lazarus would die. So the death was already known by God. This was not a surprise to God. Your child's death was not a surprise to God. It was not a, "Oops, I forgot to do that and something happened." No, it was not a surprise to him. And this happened for the glory of God. There is always a purpose to our pain, and this is hard for us. This part we don't like. When my mom died, when my son died, I didn't really care about God's glory in that moment. I just wanted my person back. And we cannot know all of the reasons that God does what he does. We just can't. We want to. We try to figure it out. Well, maybe this happened. Maybe this happened. But we can't. We can't know it all. I think that's why the Bible talks so much about faith, because there's a lot we're not going to understand on this side of heaven. But often God does reveal things to us later, after we've chosen to trust him or after some time has passed. And then there are some questions that we just won't get answered on this side of heaven. And that is so, so hard. But if Jesus says that pain is always used for good in Romans 8:28, that no pain or suffering comes as a surprise to him, then he can be trusted. I've recently been really into reading people's near-death experiences. I highly recommend John Burke to you. He has this book called Imagine Heaven, and he has gathered testimonies of people who've had near-death experiences over the past 70 years. And because of the technology that we have these days, it's possible for him to find people all around the world, all different ages. But I love because he chooses people who don't have a reason to make a profit off of their story. Perhaps they're a surgeon. They make plenty of money. They don't need to sell books. In fact, their testimony would discredit them perhaps in the medical community, but they know that they know what they experienced, and so they share. And just like last night we said that there is power in the word of our testimony, I can see that this collection of testimonies is bringing glory to God and comfort to his people as he reveals a tiny piece of what's to come in these stories. But many of these people report that when, in the moment they are with the Lord, that they suddenly know instantly downloaded to them why and how the pain in their life worked for good. In that moment, it makes sense to them. They have an understanding that they didn't have before. And it's those testimonies that I cling to. And what they're saying in their testimonies is what is in Scripture. That now we don't know, but then we will understand. Here comes my favorite verse, even when I'm dealing with pain. Verse 5. So although Jesus loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. Finally, he said to the disciples, let's go back to Judea. He waited until Lazarus was good and dead, though he loved them so much. Though he loves you so much, he sometimes chooses to wait. He sometimes chooses to allow suffering or death. And he doesn't say yes to our begging prayers. But he still loves you. His lack of an answered prayer or his lack of healing in the way that you wanted does not equal a lack of love for you. That's what we see. Jesus waited to be sure that everyone knew Lazarus was really dead. Verse 8, but his disciples objected. Rabbi, they said, only a few days ago, the people in Judea were trying to stone you. Are you going there again? And Jesus replied, there are 12 hours of daylight every day. During the day, people can walk safely. They can see because they have the light of this world. But at night, there is danger of stumbling because they have no light. First, we see Jesus is willing to go back where they were stoning him. They tried to stone him. He's willing to go back. And we have to remember, as much as he is God, he's also human here. They might stone him. He might feel this pain. And because of his time in the Garden of Gethsemane before he died, we know that he wishes desperately that he wouldn't have to feel pain and suffer. He asked God, take this cup from me. He didn't want to do it. He sweat drops of blood. He was in such agony. But even still, the fact that Jesus is willing to go back to where they wanted to stone him to now heal his friend shows a tremendous amount of love and selflessness. He sees the big picture. He sees that his time on earth is running short. It's going to be dark again soon. He won't be there. And while he's with them, he has work to do. But he sees the big picture. And even in our suffering, he sees the big picture that we can't see yet. Verse 11, then he said, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but now I will go and wake him up. The disciples said, Lord, if he's sleeping, he will soon get better. They thought Jesus meant Lazarus was simply sleeping, but Jesus meant Lazarus had died. So he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there. For your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there. For now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him. The disciples have no idea what Jesus is about to do. This does not mean that Jesus wasn't there when your child died. Because here, Jesus is in his physical body. He can only be one place at one time. Now, in his resurrected body and through the power of the Holy Spirit, he can be everywhere all the time. And so this isn't saying that Jesus was not with you and your child when they died. But the disciples have no idea about what Jesus is about to do. And so we know the end of the story, right? But right here, they are clearly so confused about Jesus' ways right now in this moment in their lives. And so are we, right? Because we don't know the end of the story. We don't know what Jesus is about to do in our lives. But now, like the disciples, where Jesus says, now you will really believe. Now we have an opportunity to really believe. As we experience Jesus in the death of our child, to not just know of him because we've been in church for all of our lives, but to know him. Verse 16, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let's go too and die with Jesus. I love this line because this is the same Thomas we rag on for being doubting Thomas. People forget here he's the one who is willing to go and die with Jesus into the suffering where he may be stoned. And it reminds me that I am like the disciples. I can be fired up for Jesus one moment like Thomas is here and willing to die, and then later doubting all I believe. I find comfort in the fact that the people in Scripture are real people. Just because it's in Scripture doesn't mean they did it right or they did it well. They are a mixed bag of good choices and bad choices, of being brave and being weak. Verse 17, when Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. The sisters are like us too. I love that God includes this so we can see differences in our responses. Some of us run to Jesus in our grief, and some of us prefer to stay away from him. I wonder if Mary was mad at Jesus. I bet she thought, I have nothing to say to you, Jesus, right now. I'm not running out there to meet you. You let me down. So Martha runs to meet him. Verse 21, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. We get that. But even now, she says, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. Perhaps there are moments where you are full of faith and trust like Martha. She hints here. She knows her brother is dead, but she hints that she still believes Jesus has the power to do whatever he wants, including heal her brother. And maybe you have faith like Martha sometimes. Maybe you have experienced him in other losses, and when you think back, you're like, okay, I know that you are faithful. I know that you are who you say you are. Verse 23, Jesus told her, your brother will rise again. And so here we see maybe she wasn't quite sure. Yes, Martha said, he will rise when everyone else rises at the last day. And Jesus told her, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never, ever die. Do you believe this, Martha? Yes, Lord, she told him. I have always believed you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God. Right here, Martha makes her public confession of faith. It was her suffering that she decided what she believed to be true about who Jesus was. If she hadn't decided before, right now, she became a true follower of Christ. And for all of us, our suffering, it forces us to figure out what we believe. The death of our child forces us to decide what we really believe to be true about God. Verse 28, then she returned to Mary. She called Mary aside from the mourners and told her, the teacher is here and wants to see you. I love this because apparently Jesus had asked Martha, will you go get Mary? I love how even when Mary is not seeking Jesus in her pain, he seeks her. He pursues her. But he doesn't force her to come see him because love gives a choice. He says, I'm here and I want to see you. Will you come to me with your grief, Mary? And he says the same thing to each of us today. Will you come to me with your grief? And I love because there's no indication here that Jesus has a favorite. He doesn't love Mary or Martha more because of how they responded. His love is the same. And he meets us where we are. And so, verse 29, so Mary immediately went to him. If I knew Jesus was asking for me personally, I too would rush to him. But the thing is, he does ask for us personally. He wants us to come to him. He says in Matthew, come to me. Insert your name right there. Come to me, Molly, and all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest for your souls. Verse 30, Jesus had stayed outside the village at the place where Martha met him. It's interesting to me how he drew Martha away from the hustle and bustle of the crowds. And it's a reminder to us that we need to take time to get away, to be with Jesus, even if that's in our car, to slow down and be still, to be intentional. Let him draw you away from the hustle and bustle of the people, of work, even of your family and their needs. Let him pull you away. Verse 31, when the people who were at the house consoling Mary saw her leave so hastily, they assumed she was going to Lazarus' grave to weep, so they followed her there. That's kind of them. They didn't want her to weep alone. When Mary arrived where Jesus was and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. She's weeping here, I would imagine. Can you picture it? After staying home all day and probably stewing over her anger and her sadness, her emotions are finally coming out toward Jesus. She throws herself down at his feet, a picture of surrender or worship or submission or maybe just exhaustion. I don't know. And maybe she's gripping his tunic as she wails. She's being honest, though, in her feelings toward him. If you had been here, Lord, my brother would not have died. She's not sugarcoating it, which shows us that our honest grief can be faithful. Our honest grief can be full of faith. And she is also professing her faith in a different way. She's saying, Jesus, I believe that you could have healed him. What about you? I know you've had this thought. If you are honest with God, God, I thought you were going to heal my child. I thought you were going to protect my child because I believed that you could. when Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up in him, and he was deeply troubled. This didn't make sense to me before I lost loved ones. Why in the midst of all the weeping is Jesus suddenly angry? I thought, is he mad at Mary for making such a scene in front of all these people? No, that doesn't line up with what we know about Jesus. His is only ever a righteous anger. He's not mad that someone made a scene and took away part of his put together look he was going for. No, he looks around at these dear friends, all of these people who are so incredibly sad, and it breaks his heart. He's mad at death. He's mad at sin and the human condition and the curse that even brought death into the world in the first place, because it wasn't supposed to be this way. Ever. There was no death in heaven. There was no death in the garden before the curse. These people that he dearly loves weren't meant to experience separation and pain in grief. And we were not meant to experience being separated from our child. It was never supposed to happen. And so the deep anger is at death and sin and our enemy. And his heart is breaking as he looks at these friends. Where have you put him, he asked them. And they told him, Lord, come and see. And then Jesus wept. He knows what he's about to do with Lazarus. And yet here his heart breaks at the pain he sees his loved ones experiencing. He could have kept it in. He could have just been like, I'm not going to deal with that because I know what I'm about to do. But he wept. He allowed himself to experience our pain. And the same is true for us. Even when he knows why he allowed suffering into our lives, he weeps with you. Not a trickle. It didn't say Jesus teared up. He wept, shoulders shaking, heaving, tears streaming, weep, because he hates to see us in this pain. He hates to see the ones that we love in pain. And he knows it was not meant to be this way. He hates that my child suffered in the end. Wasn't supposed to be that way. He hates that you are now suffering without your child. And he weeps with you. The people seeing him weep, who were standing nearby, said, see how much he loved him. They knew. They knew how much he loved Lazarus. And they could tell in the way that he wept. But some said, this man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying? The truth is, he could have. And when he does not, what we know from this piece of history is that Jesus cares more than we could possibly know. When we don't understand what he's doing, we come back to that. He cares more than we could possibly know. We remember his grief with us. Verse 38, Jesus was still angry as he arrived at the tomb. Recently, one of my sisters was just being taken down. She's a strong believer, and she is being taken down in fear about something. And it was really the first time, I think, that I experienced this deep welling up of anger at the enemy. Because I love my sister, and she knows God, and I could see that he was attacking her. And I was like, don't you dare, devil. And I prayed for her that day. in an authority and an anger that when I was done, she goes, wow, well, I didn't know you could pray like that. I didn't either. But it was this deep, how dare you? Oh, no, you don't, devil. You get away from her. She belongs to God. And that is the righteous anger toward the kingdom of darkness. And that is the righteous anger that Jesus feels on our behalf. And so while he was still angry, he arrived at the tomb, a cave with a stone rolled across its entrance. And with a voice so authoritative and strong, roll the stone aside, Jesus told them. I'm coming for you, Satan. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. I love the humanity in this part of the story. She still has no idea what Jesus is about to do, but she's concerned about the horrible smell. And you know what? There is part of grief that includes laughter. Don't forget. Right after my mom died, her body is still warm. And she's laying in our living room after her battle with cancer. And my dad reminded us she wants a piece of her hair to be sprinkled at our family cabin was one of her wishes, that we would all go do that together in her honor. And so my dad runs and grabs scissors, and before we can stop him, he goes, whack, right in the front center of her forehead. And we were like, Dad, Mom would have killed you. That's what, why couldn't you take a piece down here where it doesn't make it, just right here? And we laughed. Verse 40, Jesus responded, didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believe? We can choose to believe, and we will see his glory in this. Or we can choose to walk away. We get to make that choice, but we'll miss his glory. Verse 41, so they rolled the stone aside. Then Jesus looked up to heaven and said, Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me, but I said it out loud for the sake of all these people standing here, so that they will believe you sent me. God always hears us, even when we don't say it out loud. And Jesus demonstrates being thankful in the midst of this moment. Can we be thankful, if nothing else, that God does hear us and that he does care? Or that's all we've got for now. Thank you, Lord, that you hear me and that you care. Then Jesus shouted, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out. I'm just blown away at that. The shouting of 3 simple words from our God, and a dead man is alive again. That is our God. That is his power, whether we see it or not today. He can freaking raise people from the dead. Do you know that this is what makes him different than any other God, little g, God? Buddha can't do that. This is what sets Jesus apart. This is what makes him the Lord of Lords, the God of gods. Death has no chance against him in the end. Our God is stronger than everything, than every entity, than every circumstance. Do you believe that? This feeling that you feel today, God can raise your hope up from the dead places. His hands and feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. Jesus told them, "Unwrap him and let him go." And many of the people who were with Mary believed in Jesus when they saw this happen. It might be easier to believe if we saw Jesus raise someone from the dead. It might be easier to believe if we saw Jesus raise our child from the dead. But you know what Jesus also says? Later, he says, you believe because you saw these miracles, but blessed are those who haven't seen me and believe. There is a special blessing for us because we have not seen Jesus with our own eyes yet, because we did not get our children raised from the dead this side of heaven. But God says, blessed are you. I don't know what that looks like in the life to come, but there's something. In other words, yeah, I get that this is extra. And it's not lost on him. He knows. Many of the people who were with Mary believed in Jesus when they saw this happen, but some went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Skip to verse 53. So from that time on, the Jewish leaders began to plot Jesus' death. Raising Lazarus was the beginning of the end of Jesus' earthly life, because now they were like, we're going to take him out. It was the beginning also of the end of death, because Jesus would soon die and would then be raised just like he did Lazarus. I don't know if that story, it's not a story, it's history. It's truth. That really happened. And in it we see that Jesus sees our pain and knows the outcome that will be for our good and God's glory. We see that he seeks us even when we don't seek him. We see that he is willing to risk his life for us. We see that he is also angry at this horrible experience that was never supposed to happen, and that he weeps with us in our pain, and that he has the power to raise the dead to life. And he will raise our hope until we get to see our children again. And so he invites us to grieve. And you know, the best analogy I heard for me, and you will hear many analogies about grief is like you're going to hear there are so many. But one that helped me in the early days of grief is like this really oblong mud puddle or maybe a river. You can walk around it, you eventually could, but it will take a long time. Or you can jump in, and it's going to be messy at times. But it will take a lot less time to get to the other side, the grief where you're not bleeding out, if you aren't afraid to just jump in. It seems scarier, but I promise you it's not. You think, oh my gosh, if I start crying, I will never stop. But it's not true. You will. There was a day I cried for 3 hours straight. One time, that was the worst one. And now I am so comfortable with tears. And I cry a lot. And it's okay. Not about my son necessarily. It's not like I'm always crying about him, but I'm more tender to people. I know you could be struggling to do the daily tasks. You wonder how you might grieve with all that you have to do. And so maybe you just need some permission. And today I want to give you permission to do a few things. You'll see them on page 47. Because I want you to choose to grieve intentionally. That's what it looks like to dive in. To grieve on purpose. And that means you may have to say no to other things for this season in order to have the time to grieve well. And I am not an expert in grief, but I have a lot of experience with it. So I want to give you permission to grieve well, quote unquote. And you are free to do the following. You have permission to get the tears out. You may feel that if you let them come, they will never stop. But they will. You might cry and then dry up, and then cry and then dry up. All of it is so normal, and it will not be that way for the rest of your life. It will not. But science is showing us that grieving is cleansing to us. Crying is cleansing to us. You will feel better. I equate it with, the Lord gave me this picture of a grief cup. And you have this cup, and it gets, your grief just fills up, fills up, fills up, fills up. And if you don't pour some of it out on purpose when you want it to come out, then it will come out when you're sitting at a fancy dinner and your waiter asks you what you want and you just start sobbing and you can't pull it together. And he's like, what the heck is happening? And you're like, oh my gosh. That happened to me. And I learned, okay, I need to take some time to grieve by myself so that it's not overflowing uncontrollably in public when I don't want it to. And so in order to do that, you have permission to say no. Doesn't have to be forever, but as long as it needs to be, I want you to be a little more selfish with your time. Grieving takes a lot of energy. A lot. And so you are wise to push some things off of your plate, and people will understand, or if they don't, then they don't. And it doesn't have to be forever, but they can find someone else for the committee or to coach the Little League or the ministry at church or whatever it is. You have permission to say, I'm sorry, I just can't right now. You don't have to give them a reason. Which leads that you do have permission to carve out time to be alone. So that you don't cry in the middle of the Cheesecake Factory. So that you don't have to leave a party in tears when you don't want to. Cry in your car, cry at home. I loved crying while I was outside taking a walk with sunglasses on. Something about moving your body, crying, nobody can see your eyes. It's all so much better than crying when you really don't want to. You have permission in your time alone to read the Bible and talk to God out loud. There is a difference. I can pray in my mind. God is telepathic, so he can hear. In fact, he speaks to us telepathically, right, in our mind? So that is a way to communicate with him for sure. But there is something powerful and healing about your own brain hearing yourself say, God, this is how I'm feeling. And hearing your own self say, but I trust you, Lord, when you get to that point. If you've read the Psalms before and thought they were boring, they won't be now. You will meet God in ways you've never seen him before. When you seek me, you will find me, he says. He's not hiding from you. And you will find him as you seek him. You have permission to get yourself a massage. You know, when Jesus healed people, he often touched them. Our bodies require touch. Grief makes knots in our bodies. After my son died, I found this place here in India. I don't even know if they still have them, but you could go in and you kept all your clothes on, and they would give you a 30-minute really deep tissue massage. And I went weekly for a while. I introduced my husband to massages. He had never had one before, and now he is obsessed. So I just recommend, if you can, you have permission to get a massage. Your health, I did both extremes. I told you a little last night. I would sleep too much, drink too much, eat all the comfort food I possibly could. In another season of my life, a different grief, I barely ate, barely slept. So for this grief season, I give you permission to not eat normally, or, maybe not do what you always do. Maybe, if you're someone who normally works out, you're not working out and you feel guilty. It's okay. If you never were active and I'm like, I can't stop, I just feel like I have to walk every day, or I can't feel normal, that's okay. But in all of it, keep talking to God. You have permission to get outside and move. It's really important. There's something about nature. There's something about moving our bodies. I think it was really easy for me to sink into moments of depression when I stopped moving my body. As I said, some of my best cries were during a walk with my sunglasses on. And getting good exercise helps you sleep, which is sometimes difficult when we're grieving. So you also have permission to sleep. I never take naps, but when I was grieving, I needed naps. Or maybe you're someone who always gets up at 6 a.m. And maybe while you're grieving, you just let yourself sleep in a little. No guilt. You may also need an antidepressant. You have permission to ask a doctor about an antidepressant. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, but if you're struggling to function, doesn't mean you'll be on it the rest of your life, especially if you're doing all this other work. But if you're struggling to function every day, it might be time to talk to your doctor. Talking to a counselor also helps. And I know not everyone is comfortable talking about their feelings. And also, the first one may not be right. I saw 3 before I finally found the one. It's kind of like dating. But it's worth it when you find the one. They are such a gift. To ask you things your friends and family won't think to ask you. You can say things that you can't say to your spouse or to your friends. Finally, don't isolate all the time. You have permission to spend time with friends and family and to laugh. I told you about the story about my mom. It was so good. It felt so good in the midst of all that heaviness to just have a real laugh. And I think we think we're dishonoring the ones that we loved. But if they're in heaven, they're having the best time. And laughter is a medicine for the soul. The evening after my son's funeral, I remember going back to my house, and a bunch of our friends came over. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table with pizza from 3 different pizza places because I couldn't make a decision about what kind of pizza I wanted. And my sweet friends were like, we'll get them from all 3. And so we're sitting there, and I have a little bit of this pizza and a little bit of this pizza. And I can't remember if we were just talking about like childhood memories or something, but I remember laughing. And it was so helpful. If you do this good work of grief, the paralyzing grief won't last as long. My husband lost his dad when he was 13, and it took him a lot longer to get over that. He says, I wish I would have done it like you did. And so you have permission to take time to grieve well as you honor the one you love. It won't always feel like this. And you are going to like the version of you after this grief. I like this version of me better. I'm more compassionate. My priorities are different. I love Jesus more. It's like I would never wish this on myself, but I also am thankful for it. Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest until the day you see your child again.